Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Join me as I paint Mrs. Claus and Rudolph. Hello everyone, hope you're having a happy holiday. So today's sketch is Mrs. Claus and Rudolph, and I started this sketch back in August. So here I am covering this sketch with matte medium from Liquitex. So before getting into my sketch, I tested out some things. I used different references. I looked at maybe 3 or 4 images of Mrs. Claus. And once I had the thumbnail sketch solid to the point where I felt I was ready for the final drawing, I then transferred the image onto this round wooden board. I then did something similar with the Rudolph. However, the Rudolph was directly drawn onto the board. I did not transfer it because I was pretty much referencing to other photos and piecemealing things together. I added a couple different details to the from the original sketch, I should say. So after getting that sketch done, I sealed it with matte medium and laid out the different types of paints that I was using. So the cool thing about the paints that I'm using here are that they're heavy body acrylics, and the brand that I'm using are Master Touch from Hobby Lobby. I believe this is their in-store brand. I could be wrong, I'm not sure. However, I know there's other paints that are just as good, if not better, than this Master Touch brand. So anyways, getting into the colors, I used the traditional green and red Christmas colors, let things dry. I made sure I had a thin layer. I noticed that when I was working on Mrs. Claus's cloak, I got too detailed too fast, so I had to pull myself away and let things dry so that I can layer and add more shadow and shade as things went on. So I just moved on and painted everything very preliminary. So that's why you see her face sort of in a flat plane. I dove into Rudolph, and you can see here that the heavy body paint is very thick and textural. It gives things dimension. I really enjoy that about this paint. While working on this paint, I was able to maintain my palette. I used a porcelain palette that I typically use for my watercolor paints, and I wanted to test it out on my acrylics. It worked really well. I sprayed the paint with a mister and then placed a paper towel over that, sprayed that paper towel with the mister, and sealed everything with saran wrap. It maintained the paint wet for about 2 to 3 days without drying. It could have lasted longer, but of course I ran out. I was using it for the period of time that I was working on this. So I do think that that's a great method. I would recommend trying it, especially because the porcelain is non-porous. So here my dog was hassling me for a walk, and of course he's my biggest critic, so you'll see him later on in the video. So getting back into the painting, once I was able to get the first layer of paint I let things dry. So this is what I call the U stage. We start off really good at the top of the U, and if you think of the letter U, at the bottom, it's the belly of the U, and you kind of are struggling to get up to the other side of the U. So this is the part where you really have to push through when things look ugly, essentially. And I just kind of keep getting in the colors and color blocking. I do go back to my original painting that I worked on for my mom, the Santa painting. So if you're not following me on Instagram, go check me out over there, kmontes_art. And I notice the brush strokes, I take account into how I did my technique, because that was about a year ago that I painted that piece. So I wanted them to look pretty similar, and I studied it for a while, made sure I had the brush strokes in a similar format. I layered and color blocked things very similarly so that they wouldn't look so different from each other. So if you're trying to create a collection and you happen to work on different pieces in like various time spans, that's a good technique to use. I would have had it in person, but my mom had it hanging up in her living room already, so I wasn't able to physically reference it, which is even better. But you know, using the picture works. So getting into the reindeer, you can see that I'm sort of like doing a painterly brush stroke, very back and forth and patchy to create that texture that I originally had in the Santa. I got really detailed with the reindeer right away, and I realized I had to pull back, move on to something else, because if you get stuck in an area where you're focusing too much on the details, you kind of forget about the rest of the painting. So some people like to do this also, like working as a whole on the painting, whereas other people enjoy getting one part completely done, moving on to the next part, and so on. For me, it feels more like a burden, so I like to see the overall color blocking and then do the second layer of, shades and shadows, then move on to the details so that things seem to be cohesive. So that's why I had to pull away from the reindeer for a bit, because you can see here that it looks pretty much finished and Mrs. Claus's face is not. So I was feeling a bit overwhelmed, especially because portraits are not my forte. So that could have been the reason why I got the Rudolph in the fastest. So moving into day 2, I went into the painting with fresh eyes after working on this painting for maybe 3 or 4 hours the night before, and I was able to notice things that were missing, things that I needed to add to, things I wanted to do better on, and just taking my time. I had to remind myself to slow down a bit because I am an alla prima painter, which means I do things all at once in the same day. I had to really slow down. You can see me tediously adding detail to her lips, but I so badly wanted to get things in gesturally, but that's not how I painted the Santa, so I had to just take my time. So getting in the details, the brushes that I used were the Velvet Touch Princeton brush, the smaller ones for details, and I use larger ones for bigger brush strokes. And I also use their other collection, the Select. So those are both Princeton brush brands. I really enjoy those. They're primarily used for acrylics and watercolors. So here we have Fauci, Mr. Fauci. He is hassling me for rubs and hugs, and he's also my biggest critic. He judges me all the time. So he thinks that I'm doing an okay job so far. So moving into the mountains, I referenced several photos. It's really important to always reference things when you're piecemealing an image together. Even though this wasn't an exact copy of the mountains, I still needed to understand where the light was coming from, how the snow sits on the mountaintops, how things fit into the scene, and being able to create a cohesive look with the mountains. So getting into the final touches, adding in the sky with a variation of blues and whites, because we had so much detail in the foreground. I tried to bring less focus to the background and adding in any final touches, taking a step back to really study any missing things, any things that you want to add, any final details. This is the perfect time to add that. So we're getting to the completed version here, and we'll get into the final shots. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy the final shots. As we get into the holidays, I hope everyone is having a wonderful and safe holiday. Please like and subscribe and check out my other videos. And here is the final shot.